I'm happy to introduce my guest today, Matthew Lee, with Associated Press, the man who's grilling the State Department on a regular basis. Thank you so much for coming.
My pleasure.
Mr. Lee, I'm going to start with a philosophical question. They say journalists have the power to stop a war. Why has it not been the case in the last 20 years, 15, 20 years?
That's a really good question. I think that one of the reasons is that there are not enough journalists out there who are really pushing back against governments who may not be representing the facts as they actually are. I think we saw a very stark example of that in the run-up to the Iraq War, where the claims of the administration, of the Bush administration, clearly were not correct. And there were very few journalists out there who were either willing or able to really dig down beneath the claims of the administration to find out what really the truth was. And I think that in a lot of cases, governments intimidate journalists and intimidate them into not asking the tough questions and not.
Was it the case with the U.S. government?
Well, it was very difficult for reporters in Washington at the time to really get to the truth. You had big news outlets like the New York Times and the Washington Post who have sources that are supposed to be impeccable, and so I think that there was a sense among editors of other outlets that if these big news organizations were reporting on what the alleged intelligence was about weapons of mass destruction that Saddam Hussein had, that if they were reporting that, then it must be the gospel truth. And there were very few reporters or organizations who were who had enough doubt, who felt the need to question and to really dig down to get the correct information. And I think that, the results are what we have seen. I don't think that this is a problem just in the United States. I think it's a problem all over the place. Governments do what they want to and will say what they think defends or backs up their policies.
When Israel launched an attack on the Palestinians last fall, you were there at the State Department criticizing the administration in very strong terms for quote-unquote silent diplomacy. But the U.S. hasn't been really silent. They've been most supportive of Israel as, hundreds of Palestinians were dying. And what more did you want to hear from them? Did you want to hear bravo Israel? What was it?
No, the silent diplomacy that I talked about in that, I was talking about in that exchange was actually about the U.S. refusing to condemn or not take a stronger line with the Turks, who were saying that what Israel was doing was a war crime. Now, the United States is an ally of Israel and is all administrations say they will always have Israel's back. They are 100% committed to Israel's defense, and it's very rare for there to be U.S. criticism of Israel. At the same time, I think the U.S. has to be consistent, and so in that case, I was looking for. The question that I was asking was aimed at getting them to say, if they believed it, that they thought the Turks were wrong to be criticizing Israel. They eventually did 2 days later. But you have and this was a case where you had one ally, Israel, and another ally, a NATO ally, Turkey, at odds. And this is a situation that we've seen ever since the Gaza flotilla. And it's a very difficult line. And what I'm pushing for is consistency, or to show that the administration isn't consistent, that it has a lack of consistency in dealing with various allies around the world.
What is the biggest criticism in the journalistic community as you sense it right now?
Well, I think that I think that a lot of reporters don't understand how the administration justifies not doing anything in Syria when they did do it in Libya.
So they have the precedent, and they would want the administration to actually go in?
No, I don't know. I don't know if it's a question of reporters wanting the administration to go in, but it's a question of what happened in Libya was that Gaddafi threatened to hit Benghazi, and that was justification in the minds of in this administration and Europe for there to be military intervention. Now in Syria you have a case where Assad has actually acted on that threat, and there have been many more deaths than there were ever predicted to have happened in Benghazi, and yet they are not. There is no military intervention like there was, and that hits back at the consistency and the lack of consistency.
Where does that lack of consistency come from, in your opinion?
That's a really good question, and that's the question that you have to. That I think the reporters have an obligation. You did this in this case. Why are you not doing the same in this other case?
Not necessarily pushing for it, right?
Not necessarily pushing for it. You know, any administration is going to have its policies, and it can decide its policy. I don't take a position on what the policy is. I don't think it's my job to say, hey, President Obama, you're wrong on this. I think it's my job to say, hey, President Obama, or hey, State Department, hey, administration, why are you doing this?
To track down inconsistencies. That's what.
Well, exactly. I think that they owe the people that they govern an explanation of what they're doing in our name, and oftentimes it's really, really difficult to drag that out because, one, the policy is inconsistent, or two, they don't really know what they're doing. You know, I think the Arab Spring took a lot of people by surprise, and there was a lot of confusion. No one really knew exactly what to do, and I think that continues to this day. I mean, we look at what happened in Tunisia, which was going to be the model, you know, the first country to overthrow to oust its strongman. You know, and that was going to be the model. They had elections, everything was fine, and now the opposition leader gets killed. You know, there's a lot of concern about what is going to happen in Tunisia, about what is going to happen in Libya itself, particularly after the attack on the U.S. diplomatic mission in Benghazi. Egypt is a big question. I mean, it's completely up in the air. You know, the army says the country is at risk of falling apart. And I think that it's my job as a journalist, and the job of other journalists, to find out exactly how this government, the government that I cover, if I was in London, I would be trying to do the same thing with the British government, but I happen to be covering the American government. So to find out how they're going to deal with this, because it's a huge issue.
You said you had a sense that the administration doesn't know what they're doing.
Well, I think that a lot of people were taken by surprise at the speed
of
the transition.
As
well, I think
events
there's still
unfold.
a lot. I mean, you know, you can't. You know, it's nearly impossible to predict the future. It's very impossible to predict the future, and when you're a policymaker, that is what you have got to do. And thus far, I don't think that this administration has really. I don't think the people who are in charge of the Middle East and North Africa have really had a good sense of what was going to happen once decades of autocratic rule came to an end. I mean, it's a question of, you know, do you want stability?
With no small help from the United States in some of those countries, like Libya.
Well, I wouldn't use Libya as an example. I would use Egypt as a main example. Egypt, for years, the American government, under both Republicans and Democrats, coddled a dictator, an autocrat, Hosni Mubarak. Why? Because he provided stability in what is arguably the biggest cauldron of unrest and instability in the world. And yet that sacrificed the Egyptian people's desire for democracy. Well, now the Egyptian people have democracy, but they're not sure exactly how it works or what to do. And the American government doesn't know how to deal with that.
I want to ask you about access journalism. What do you think about it? Do you see dangers behind access journalism?
Yes, I do. I think there's a big problem in this town, but I presume it's also in other capitals, where reporters are maybe not as hard-hitting as they want to be or should be because they fear losing access to senior officials who will give them information, and that is it's problematic. I don't know how you correct it. I think you basically just have to stand up for what you believe in, and hopefully what you believe in is getting the truth out and holding the administration to account.
What do you think about the administration's crackdown on whistleblowers?
Yeah, I've got problems with that. I think that in a free society, in a democracy, you can't. You can't expect people who are carrying out policies that they don't personally agree with to stay silent. And two, you can't and you shouldn't punish them if and when they speak out about it. Now, it may well be that a whistleblower is wrong or has an agenda to pursue. But I don't like the idea that people get punished. At the same time, it would be chaos if every classified document in town was all of a sudden, released or leaked.
As far as the crackdown, what kind of a signal does it send to journalists?
Well, I think it sends a signal that the government doesn't want you. Take me as an example. I look at this whistleblowing crackdown as the government doesn't want me to get the information that I think I need to explain to the American people what's going on, and they're willing to go after not just the person who gives such information, but they're willing to go after me as well. That's and so I think that it has a chilling effect that I think is not good. Now I have to say that the United States' government is one of the most open governments in the world. That's not saying a whole lot, because it does a lot of things. There are a lot of clandestine things that go on in the name of the American people that I think most American people, not most, that I think some or many American people might not agree with. I think it's a journalist's responsibility to get that out, to get the information out, and then people can make up their own minds as to whether or not they think that the policy is correct.
Why do you think this administration is doing more work in that direction than any other administration?
I don't know. Frankly, I have no idea. It is somewhat surprising considering this president came in saying that he wanted to have the most transparent administration in history, and yet some of the actions that his administration has taken appear to be, exactly the opposite.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome. My pleasure.